You never think about anyone but yourself, my mom said, and the worst part was, she said it calmly, not shouting, just stating it like a fact she'd long ago stopped questioning. I was 26, standing in my childhood kitchen with a casserole dish I'd driven 40 minutes to bring over, and she was looking at me like I was a stranger who'd tracked mud onto her floor. My younger sister was sitting at the kitchen table behind her, scrolling through her phone, and she didn't even look up. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not broke, shifted. Like a bone that had been set wrong for years and finally moved into the right place, it hurt, but it was also, somehow, a relief. Let me back up. Growing up, I always understood, without anyone ever saying it plainly, that my sister was the one who mattered more. Not in a dramatic locked-in-the-attic kind of way. Just in the small constant accumulation of 1,000 tiny choices my parents made year after year that told me exactly where I stood. My sister's name is Blythe. She's 3 years younger than me, and from the time she was about 5 years old, she had a quality that I could never quite name. A softness maybe, or a kind of helplessness that made people want to protect her. She cried easily. She needed things. And our parents, especially our mom, responded to need the way a sunflower responds to light. Completely, automatically, without question. I was different, I figured things out. If I had a problem, I solved it quietly and didn't mention it afterward. I got good grades because I was interested in learning, not because anyone pushed me. I made my own lunch starting around age 8 because our mom was usually busy helping Blythe with something. A school project, a friendship drama, an outfit decision that had somehow become a family emergency. I didn't resent Blythe for it, not then, I just adapted. That's what I did. By the time I was in high school, I had already learned to take up as little space as possible. I got a part-time job at 16 so I wouldn't have to ask my parents for money. I applied to colleges mostly on my own, filled out my own financial aid forms, figured out scholarship applications by reading instructions and asking my school counselor. My parents came to exactly one of my cross-country meets the entire 4 years I ran. They said they were busy, and I believed them, and I didn't make a scene about it. Blythe, meanwhile, had her entire volleyball schedule printed and posted on the refrigerator. My parents attended every game. My dad built a system for reviewing Blythe's serve on video. My mom drove 2 hours each way to a weekend tournament in 8th grade and talked about it for a month afterward. I told myself I didn't care about that stuff. And honestly, I think I halfway believed it. I went to college in state on a partial scholarship and worked 20 hours a week to cover the gap. I studied accounting, which sounds boring until you understand that numbers were the one thing in my life that always made complete sense. They didn't have favorites. They didn't say one thing and mean another. They just were what they were. I graduated in 3.5 years, landed a job at a regional accounting firm 3 weeks after graduation, and moved into a studio apartment 45 minutes from where I grew up. I was 22 years old, fully self-supporting, and proud of myself I could barely sleep the night before my first day. I called my mom to tell her I got the job. She said, "That's great, honey," and then told me Blythe had just been selected for a travel volleyball team and asked if I could help with gas money for away games. I sent $200. I told myself it was fine. The next few years, I built a life. I got promoted. I moved into a 1-bedroom. I started saving seriously, a Roth IRA, an emergency fund, then a taxable brokerage account because I'd read enough about compound interest to understand that the earlier you started, the more it mattered. I was good at my job, and my job rewarded me for being good at it, and for the first time in my life I felt like I was in a place where my efforts actually produced proportional results. Meanwhile, my parents' financial situation was deteriorating in ways they didn't fully explain, but that I could piece together from half sentences and what they didn't say. My dad had been laid off in his early 50s and taken a job that paid significantly less. My mom worked part-time but her hours had been cut. They had credit card debt. They'd refinanced the house twice. None of this was ever said outright. I was expected to intuit it, worry about it quietly, and figure out if I could help. So I did. I started sending $300 a month when I was 24. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was the right thing to do. And honestly, part of me, the part that had spent 24 years hoping to finally do something right in their eyes, thought that this was it. This was how I'd finally show them I was worth something to this family. By 26, I was sending $600 a month. I never told Blythe. I didn't tell my parents the full amount I was making. I just sent what I sent and didn't ask for acknowledgement. Here's what I didn't know. Blythe was telling them it was her. Not all of it, not explicitly. But she had let them believe, from early on, that she was contributing to the household. She'd made vague comments about wanting to help. She'd mentioned something about setting up automatic transfers. And my parents, who wanted so badly to believe their favorite daughter was also generous and responsible, had connected those dots in the most convenient way possible. They thought the money was from Blythe. I found this out on a Sunday in March, standing in my childhood kitchen with that casserole dish. I'd driven over because my dad had mentioned he wasn't feeling well. I'd brought food because that's what I did. I showed up with practical things and hoped it was enough. Blythe was visiting too, which was unusual. She'd moved to another city about a year earlier to follow a guy she'd been dating for 3 months, and she didn't make the trip home often. We were all sitting in the living room after dinner, and it was almost nice, almost like a family, until my mom brought up a bill they were struggling to cover. A car repair. Expensive. My mom looked at Blythe with this soft, grateful expression and said, "I don't know what we'd do without you." I waited for Blythe to correct her. To say something, anything, to redirect that gratitude toward the person it actually belonged to. Blythe tucked her hair behind her ear and said, "Of course, Mom." Something cold moved through me. I said, "What exactly does she do for you?" My mom looked at me like I'd said something rude. "She helps us out every month. She has been for a while now." She said it the way you'd explain something obvious to someone slow. I kept my voice very steady. I said, "I'm the one sending money every month." And my mom who I had been quietly financially supporting for over 2 years, looked at me and said, "You never think about anyone but yourself." The room went completely quiet. Blythe was looking at the floor. My dad was looking at the wall. My mom was looking at me with an expression that was almost pitying, like I was embarrassing myself by lying. "I have bank records," I said. "I have 2 years of transfers, every single month. Can show you right now." My mom said, "Why are you trying to take credit for what your sister does? What's wrong with you?" I remember thinking very clearly, oh, so this is what it is. This is the ceiling. Because I had spent my entire life believing that if I just did enough, proved enough, gave enough, eventually the scales would tip. Eventually they would see me. But standing in that living room, I understood, for the first time, fully, in my body, that there was no amount of evidence that would make them choose me over her. They didn't want the truth. They wanted the version of reality where Blythe was the good one, and I was the difficult one, and everything made the sense they needed it to make. I picked up my purse. I said, "Okay, that was all." I drove home and sat in my parking lot for a long time. Not crying exactly, more like being very still while something large rearranged itself inside me. That night I transferred no money. The following month, the same. I sent no explanation, made no announcement. I just stopped. 3 weeks later, my mom called and left a voicemail asking when the payment was coming. Her tone was businesslike, like I was a vendor who'd missed an invoice. I didn't call back. My dad texted 2 days after that. He said things were tight and they were counting on me. That was the exact phrase, counting on me. Not a thank you. Not an acknowledgement of anything. Just the expectation, plain and unashamed. I texted back, "I think you have me confused with Blythe." He didn't respond. Blythe called me a week later. It was the most she'd talked to me in probably 2 years. She wanted to explain. She hadn't meant for it to happen, she said. She'd just never corrected them when they assumed. And then it had gone on so long she didn't know how to fix it without making everything worse. "You let them think you were the one taking care of them," I said. For 2 years. She started to cry. Blythe always cried at exactly the right moments, and I waited to feel the old pull to make it easier, to tell her it was okay so the discomfort would end. But I didn't feel it. I felt very clear, actually. Very quiet. "I need you to understand," I said, "that I'm not angry. I'm just done." Done with what? Done with all of it. She cried harder. She said she hadn't meant for things to be like this. She said she'd always felt terrible about how our parents treated me, which I thought was interesting. She'd felt terrible but not terrible enough to say a word in 20-something years. I told her I wasn't trying to punish her. I told her I genuinely wished her well. And then I said goodbye, and I meant it, and I hung up. My parents didn't reach out again for almost 6 weeks. When my mom finally called, it was different from what I expected. She wasn't apologetic exactly, but something in her voice had changed. Less certain. Like the ground had shifted slightly and she was recalibrating. She said she'd talked to my aunt, my dad's sister, who had always seen me more clearly than my parents did. My aunt had apparently asked some pointed questions about where the money had actually been coming from. She'd suggested my mom look at the bank statements more carefully. And my mom had, she said, "I owe you an apology, I didn't say anything." She said it again, with a little more weight. "I owe you an apology. For a lot of things." I was sitting on my couch with my feet tucked under me, and I was looking at a plant on my windowsill that I'd grown from a cutting 3 years ago, and had kept alive through 4 apartment moves, and I thought, I don't know what to do with this. Because here's the thing about getting what you wanted for your whole life. Sometimes it arrives so late and in such a diminished form that you don't know how to receive it anymore. I had wanted my mom to see me for so long that I didn't have a script for the moment she actually tried. I said, "Thank you for saying that." She said, Is there any chance we could start over a little?" And I said, "I don't know. I think I need some time." She respected that, more than I expected. She said okay, she said she'd be here, and then we hung up and I sat there for a long time. I want to be honest about what came after, because I think the honest version matters more than the clean one. I didn't go back to sending money. I made that decision quietly and kept it. I wasn't doing it as punishment. I'd realized somewhere in that parking lot 6 weeks earlier that I had been sending money the way I'd done everything in that family, as a bid for love, as evidence, as an argument I was making silently, always for my own worth. And you can't keep doing that when you understand what you're doing. Something breaks open when you see it clearly. I started therapy 3 months later, not because I was falling apart. I wasn't, but because I had spent 30 years learning to need nothing from anyone, and I had a feeling that was going to cost me eventually if I didn't look at it. My therapist, during our third session, said something that I wrote down and kept. "You learned very early that love was conditional and inconsistent, so you stopped wanting it from the people who had it to give. But you're still wanting it. You're just hiding the wanting." She was right. I had wanted it all along. Slowly, and I mean slowly, over the course of that year, I started letting myself acknowledge what I actually needed. Not from my parents, not right away, just in general. I was lonely, I was proud, I was exhausted from performing competence as a personality. I had very few close friendships because I had never let anyone see me struggling, and no one wants to be close to someone who never lets them in. I started being more honest. With a colleague who asked how I was doing, I said, "Honestly, not great this week," instead of "fine." It sounds small, but it was enormous to me. I called a friend from college I'd let drift away over years of being too busy and too self-sufficient, and she picked up on the third ring and said, "Oh my God, I was literally just thinking about you." And we talked for 2 hours and made plans and actually kept them. My relationship with my parents is complicated now, which feels more honest than anything that came before it. My mom and I talk on the phone every few weeks. It's careful and sometimes awkward and occasionally almost warm. She has never fully explained herself, and I have stopped waiting for her to. My dad is quieter, more remote. I don't know if he processed what happened or simply filed it away somewhere he doesn't visit. My sister and I don't speak. That's her choice as much as mine. I don't send money anymore. Not because I can't, and not because I was making a point, but because I understand now that it was never really about the money. It was about wanting to be worth something to people who had decided, long before I was saying it, what each of their daughters was worth. And you can't buy your way out of someone else's story about you. You can only step outside it and build a different one. I'm 31 now. I have a job I'm good at and a savings account that would have seemed impossible to me at 22. I have 3 close friends and a therapist I trust and a plant on my windowsill that has survived things I wouldn't have believed a plant could survive. I still think about that casserole dish sometimes. How I carried it all the way there, careful not to spill it in my car, and then drove it all the way home again because no one asked me to leave it. I think about how many versions of that casserole dish I carried through my life. How many careful, practical offerings I brought to people who were looking right past me at someone else. I don't carry things like that anymore. Not because I've hardened, but because I've finally understood the difference between giving from abundance and giving to prove you deserve to exist. That's the version I'm still learning to live.